Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I will say as a caveat that I usually don't like to speak about the Haggadah, um, because and at the table, at my Seder table, I do not allow conversations about the Haggadah because that is not Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim. It's something completely different. So we at the table talk about Yitziat Mitzrayim, um, and I imagine, Rabbi Kelman just mentioned, but I imagine that the Seder the way it used to be, and I think about this often about what it was like, the experience of coming to Yerushalayim, coming to the Mikdash, shechting, having your animal slaughtered there, getting within the commotion of the hundreds of thousands of people who were there, making sure you got your lamb, taking it back to your table, to your family, and then because of the halacha that you're not allowed to break any bones, you have this animal sitting on the table, and that is the centerpiece of the discussion all evening long. So whether it happens before the meal or during the meal or after the meal, it's sort of like lahavdil. I think about the way Americans have Thanksgiving dinner with a turkey sitting there on the table, and it's sitting there, and it is the object of discussion. So that was the Korban Pesach. It was the object of discussion of the meal, and it was the spark for everything that took place around it. And you didn't talk about the matzah and the maror, you did the matzah and the maror. So what you spoke about was Yitziat Mitzrayim. So I'm a little bit hesitant to speak about the Haggadah, and I start with this image of what it was like, what it could have been like Bisman Beit Hamikdash, because I I was asked recently if I could invite anybody from Jewish history to my Seder, who would it be? And my response was it would probably be either Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai or one of the five Talmidei Chachamim who's listed in the attic. These were people who were the architects of what our Seder looks like. And I can't emphasize that enough. Bisman HaMikdash, everything revolved around this korban, and you sat around and you spoke, and it was the spark for the entire evening. What was it like the first year after the korban? What was the Seder? What was Pesach? I mean, I think there are 2 days in the year that shattered people. I mean, most people didn't go to the Mikdash on a regular basis, but there are 2 days in the year that shattered the Jewish people, and they had to recreate them from scratch after the Churban, because before the Churban, everything was the Mikdash. And after the Churban, without the Mikdash, they had to recreate it. Yom Kippur, there was nothing that happened on Yom Kippur outside of the Mikdash, except for that people didn't eat. The Mikdash was it. That was the center of that was all of Yom Kippur and the Seder, Pesach night. In the process of thinking about what happened, so reading through the Mishnayot, reading through the various Mekorot, and I'm going to start with the Mishnayot because that's on the source sheets. It's on the first page. I've selected some of the Mishnayot from the 10th parak of Masechet Psachim that sort of outline what happens on that night. And when you read the Mishnayot and you read them carefully, and we often don't read them carefully, I can tell you I've seen translations that were very, very loose in their translation. I read them carefully. It turns out that I believe that the original architecture of the Seder was completely different than what we think it is. And I'm going to learn these Mishnayot with you. We're going to start there. We're going to use that as a backdrop for looking at the opening passages of the Haggadah. And then we're going to conclude with the study of Vhee Sheamda, which is also something that got transformed. A lot of things got transformed as a result of the Churban. So if you have the first page open, and I think it's easier if you read this, if you see this on your own pages, but on your own source sheets. But I will share my screen just just to be safe. Here we go. I think it's the right one. Oh, no. Here we go. Okay. So I have the document open. And the writing might be a little bit small for you who are viewing it from here. So I encourage you to open up the source sheets. I'm going to read it in the Hebrew. We'll do a loose translation into the English. The translation here, I was pretty careful to make sure not to introduce any errors. Okay, and we have over here excerpts from the first 4 Mishnayot and then jumping to the 7th Mishnah. And we'll see there's a picture which emerges. Arvei psachim samuch lemincha, lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. Erev Pesach, when it gets close to mincha time, you're not permitted to eat until it gets dark. Afilu ani sheBiyisrael lo yochal ad sheyasev. Even the poorest person in Israel should not eat until they do Haseba, the leaning over on the left-hand side. And they should not give him less, they should not provide him, this poor person, with anything less than 4 cups of wine, even if he eats from the soup kitchen, the charity kitchen. That's the tamchui, right? When you get your daily meals, it's not when you get a weekly allotment, but it's literally the daily meals. And that's the tamchui. Okay? So the Mishnah talks about, it starts by talking about you're not allowed to eat beforehand because presumably we want people to have an appetite for the meal at the Seder. Even a poor person who has very little to eat in the first place. No. And they should wait until they they lean over on the left-hand side, and they shouldn't be served fewer than 4 cups of wine. Okay. Let's continue with the second Mishnah. Mazgu lo kos rishon. They poured for him the first cup. Okay. That pronoun, mazgu lo, who is that? Who are they pouring that first cup of wine for?
The guy that makes Kiddush.
Not the guy who makes Kiddush. There is no guy who makes Kiddush. Everybody makes Kiddush. Everybody says the brachot on their own wine. Who is the person that they're pouring wine for? And there is no leader of the Seder. That's a modern invention.
The ani.
The ani. This is a continuation of the previous Mishnah. The Mishnah spoke about the ani. Afilu ani sheBiyisrael. Lo yivchutu lo me'arba kosot shel yayin. They shouldn't give him less than 4 cups of wine. So they pour for him the first cup, mazgu lo, kos rishon. They pour for him the first cup. What bracha does he make? So Beit Shammai omrim mevarech al hayom v'achar kach mevarech al hayayin. So Beit Shammai say first you say mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim, and then afterwards you have the wine. Beit Hillel omrim, Beit Hillel say you reverse the order. You do the wine first, and then mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. And now we continue to the next Mishnah. Heviu lefanav. They bring before him. Before whom?
Presumably it's still the ani.
It's the ani. It's the ani. Heviu lefanav. They bring him food. Mitabel b'chazeret. So they give him so that he can be dipping some vegetables. So he's not starving. Right, so he's eating little bits of vegetables. So because he hasn't eaten, he doesn't have food. They're bringing him his food. Mitabel b'chazeret. So he's dipping his vegetables ad shemagia leparperet hapat until it comes time to the main meal. The parperet hapat are the things that you dip your bread into. So whether it's hummus or for the Sfardim, of course, whether it's hummus or the meat. Right, all that was parperet hapat. The meat, the bread, or in this case, the matzah is the main part of the meal. All those other things are considered the things that you dip your bread into. So mitabel b'chazeret ad shemagia leparperet hapat. Heviu lefanav matzah v'chazeret v'charos etu shnei tavshilim. And then they bring in front of him. They're serving him. He's the ani. He has nothing of his own. He's eating from the tamchui. So they provided him with wine, they provide him now with the vegetable, they provide him with his meal. Mishnah Dalid, Mazgulo Kos Sheni, they pour for him the second cup. B'chana bein shoel aviv. Now the son asks his father. Okay. He asks his father because something is off, something is different. This is not a regular meal that we usually get. Right? V'chan habein shoel. V'im ein da'at ba'bein aviv melamdov. The son doesn't know how to ask. The father teaches him, and he starts by saying, "Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylot," which means, I'm going to translate. The father teaches son. He should say, "Take a look. What's different tonight?" That with the words "ma nishtana," right? Are look at what's different. Do you notice? Do you notice anything? Do you notice the food is different? Do you notice the order is different? Do you notice we do things we don't usually do? Do you notice they're serving us a different kind of a meal? Right? So the father is, these are the prods that the father is giving the kid, so the kid should notice. Okay? The Mishnah continues through all the questions. Ulefi da'ato, that's the three dots there, the ellipsis. Ulefi da'ato shel bein avi melamdo. And the father should teach his son, based on what the son's capable of learning. Matchil bignut u'misayim b'shevach. He starts with describing the bad and concludes by describing the good. Okay, there are a number of other mishnayot that talk about other things that have to be said, and etc. And now, mazgulo kos Mishnah Zayin, mazgulo kos shalishi. They pour for him the third cup. Mivarech al mizonom. So he benches on what he ate. Vhee, they pour for him a fourth cup. Gomer alav et hallel. So he concludes the hallel, the omer alav birchat hashir, and you say the bracha. You read the Mishnayot, and when you pull out all the things that interrupt this flow, the Mishnah is describing what the poor person is served. That's extraordinary. That means that in the generation after Churban Habayit, or in the generations between Churban Habayit and the codification of the Mishnah, there was a very concerted effort that the entire focus of Leil HaSeder should be on the poor person. The entire focus of Leil HaSeder should be on bringing poor people into our homes. Tzipui Yetziat Mitzrayim happens somehow or another, right? Either the kid figures out or the father provokes the kid. But the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim becomes reshaped as, so who are you bringing into your home? Make sure you bring the poor person into your home. I'm going to read to you very briefly. In fact, maybe I'll share this. I'll share my screen with you. Hold on a second. Let me just switch this so you can see exactly what I'm seeing. I'm going to read to you, share with you, or learn with you a few psukim, and then something from the Rambam. Psukim are obviously before the Mishnah. The Rambam follows the Mishnah. Here are a number of psukim, okay, from Sefer Devarim. Mostly from Parshat Re'eh, speaking primarily about the Chagim, but not exclusively about the Chagim. Okay, so the first passage over here, V'samachta lifnei Hashem Elokecha, this is Perek Tet Zayin. V'samachta lifnei Hashem Elokecha, ta, obviously the mitzvah to be happy, mitzvah of Simcha and Yom Tov. Atao v'nichao v'techa v'yavdecha v'amatecha v'halevi asher b'sharecha. Because the Levi can't provide for himself. He doesn't have land. So you're responsible to provide Simcha and Yom Tov for the Levi. V'hager v'hayatom v'almana asher b'kirbecha. All of these are the people who can't provide for themselves. They are usually lacking income and usually lacking land. And should do that b'makom asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha l'shakein shemo sham. And look what the Torah adds on. V'zacharta ki eved hayita b'Mitzrayim. Now here we're talking not about Pesach. Here we're talking about Shavuot. Talking about Shavuot, the Torah says, "V'zacharta ki eved hayita b'Mitzrayim v'shamarta v'yasita et hachukim ha'ela. When it comes to Sukkot, the Torah says something very similar. Okay? Meaning, you sit down to your meal, already in the Torah, in Sefer Devarim, we already have that the focus of the Chagim should be having simcha and making sure that those who can't provide for themselves also should have simcha with you. There are a number of other, so it comes up in regarding Shavuot, it comes up regarding Sukkot, I believe, and then later on in Parsha, in Sefer Devarim, Parshat Ki Teitzei, we again find many things. The Torah tells us take care of the poor people. And why should they take care of the poor people? For example, we have, lo tatay mishpat ger yatom, make sure that they get justice. Lo tachvo beged almana. Why? Zacharta ki evet hayita b'mitzrayim v'yiftecha Hashem Elokecha misham. It's linked. Taking care of the poor people is inherently linked back to Yitziat Mitzrayim. The same thing. 2 psukim after that. When you go to harvest your field, so v'shachachta omer basadeh, and you forget the omer, lo tashuv lekachto, don't go back to collect it, leave it lager layatom v'la'almana yihiyeh. L'man yivarechecha Hashem lokecha b'chol masa yadecha, leave it for the underprivileged, right? Same thing when you're, it's not talking about wheat, if you're talking about zaitim, olives, lager layatom v'la'almana yihiyeh. The same thing is true when you're talking about grapes. Ki tivtzor karmecha, lo ta'ole lacharecha, lager latom v'la'almana yihiyeh. The same formula in each of these doesn't make a difference whether you're talking about dagan, tirosh, or yitzhar. These are the 3 primary crops in Eretz Yisrael. And again, the Torah closes with, why do you have to remember the poor people? V'zacharta ki eved hayita b'mitzrayim. I have a funny feeling that the Chazal who sat to reorganize and to shape the entire evening of Pesach, the entire Leil HaSeder, looked in Sefer Devarim. And they said, if we're going to reshape, because we don't have the carbon, that's not the center of our meal anymore, what is going to be the center of our focus? The center of our focus is we're going to use Sefer Devarim as our inspiration, and we're going to write the Mishnah, we're going to write the whole process of the Seder, not focused on the family. We're going to write the process of the Seder focused on making sure that the poor person has a place to eat. Rambam includes this. This is one of his halachot of Hilchot Yom Tov. Simcha of Yom Tov. Rambam writes, Ketzad, what does Simcha look like on Yom Tov? Haktanin notein lehem klayot ve'ogazim migdanot. For little kids, you give them nuts and sweet things. Hanashim koneh lehem begadim ve'tachshitim na'im kefi mamono. Women buy them clothes that they like. Hanashim ochlim basar v'shotim yain. Men should be eating meat and drink wine. She'ein simcha ela b'basar ve'ein simcha ela b'yayin. Here's the Rambam talking about the mitzvah of simcha, the primary mitzvah of simcha on Yom Tov. He defines it, and in the very same halacha, he writes, "Ucheshu ochel v'shoteh," when he is eating and drinking, chayav laha'achil lager layatom v'la'almana. Oh my goodness. That language, ger yatom and almana, where did he get that from? That was Sefer Devarim. Rambam looks in Sefer Devarim. He understood exactly what Chazal understood and said the Simcha of Yom Tov has to be focused on who else am I including in my Simcha, in my Simcha, right? And he continues, Avami shenoel dal tot chatzero, somebody who locks their gates, va'ochel v'shoteh hu v'ana v'ishto, but and eats and drinks with his family, ve'ino ma'achil u'mashke la'aniyim u'lemarei nefesh, and doesn't give to other people, ein zu simchat mitzvah. That's not the simcha that you're supposed to be having on Yom Tov. Ela simchat kreiso. That's the simcha for your belly, but that's not the simchat hachag. So the Rambam looks back at Sefer Dvarim and defines simcha as making sure that you have the ger yatom and almana. You can't have simcha if you're not taking care of somebody else who needs it. Between Sefer Dvarim and the Rambam, we have over here the Mishnayot. The Mishnayot formulated this. And you're going to ask me, how come we missed this? How come Tzvi Grumet is the first person to come along and reveal this? Why didn't anybody else see this? It's right there in the Mishnah, right? Here's a secret for you. And now I'm going to go back to our regular source sheets. I'll go back to sharing it, and you can go back to looking at your own source sheets as well if you like. Here we go. Here's the secret. It is in the Haggadah. In fact, it is the opening of the Magid section of the Haggadah. If you go to the second page of the source sheets, so I wanted to get everything on one page. I didn't want to leave anything out. I wanted you to be able to see a bigger picture. Because of that, the typeface is a little bit small on your screens. You can enlarge it. You can see that I sectioned it, right? A, B, C, D, right? From the very beginning until Vhee Sheamda, which is this is the section that we're going to be looking at. And I color-coded it. The first two sections are the introduction. Right? That's the purple. The blue is the first version of Magid. There's a machloket in the Gemara. There are two versions of the Magid. So the blue is the first version of the Magid. And I'll show you that in just a few minutes. And then the green is the beginning of the second version of Magid. Okay, so here you see it organized really neatly. And now let's take a little bit of a closer look at these things. The Magid starts. So we have the instruction at the top. You uncover the matzah, you pick up the Seder plate, these are all modern inventions because, before the 1400s, there was no such, or the 1300s, there was no such thing as a Seder plate. Everybody had their own little table in front of them. So they would either put the table in front of the people eating or put the food out or take the food away, okay? Nowadays, it's been translated into what we have. We have a beautifully set table. What's the very first thing you say at the Seder? This is the lechem oni that our ancestors ate in Eretz Mitzrayim. Kol dichfin yetev yechol, kol ditzrich yetev yifsach. Anybody who wants to is invited to eat. Pause that for a moment. That could not have possibly been said bisman habayit. It's impossible. Because the halacha is that in order for somebody to partake of your Pesach, they had to be counted beforehand. They had to be manui ala Pesach. Before the Shechita, you had to count, you had to list all the people. There are Mishnayot, there are whole machlokot in the Gemara about what happens if somebody was counted in two different groups to eat. Which one does he eat from? Right? Or is he allowed to eat from any of them? It's a whole complicated halachic sugya. But the bottom line is you couldn't invite somebody to your house. You couldn't walk into shul and find somebody and invite them home to eat the Pesach with you because they have no place to go. It's asur for them to eat that meat. So when you're inviting people into your home, this is obviously post-Churban. Post-Churban, what do Chazal start with? They start with inviting the poor people into the house. This opening of the Seder is exactly what the Mishnayot that we saw talk about. Mishnayot say, take care of the poor people. Guess what? The opening line of the Seder, we're taking care of the poor people. That's number one. We go from there into the Manish Tanah, just like the Mishnah did, right? And we're not going to talk about the Manish Tanah, but I am going to focus on the things that the things that did change, right? And just to highlight for you, that blue section. The blue section is the opening section of the Magid. And I'm going to take a look for a moment at the section labeled H. The section labeled H comes right after the four sons. I believe that did the previous year speak about the four sons? I think so. So the previous year spoke about the four sons, right? V'sheino yodea lishol. So I'm reading the last line in G. V'sheino yodea lishol. At patachlo. So you open them up. Shene'emar v'yigadet lavinecha bayom hahu lemor ba'avur ze asa Hashem li b'tzitim mitzrayim. The very next line of the Haggadah says Yachol merosh chodesh. What's that connected to? What would I think I can start? I can start on Rosh Chodesh.
Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach. To bring the lamb to prepare.
So let's read it. Yachol merosh chodesh, Talmud lomar bayom hahu. No, we know it from the word bayom hahu. Bayom hahu yachol mi ba'od yom. Maybe you could do it from the day. Talmud lomar ba'avur zeh. Ba'avur zeh lo amarti ela b'sha'a sheyesh matzah umaror munachim lefanecha. Okay, here's a drasha on a pasuk. Okay, the drasha in that pasuk is connected actually to two different things. On the one hand, is connected back to the last line in G. V'yigadet lavinecha bayom hahu. Well, you're supposed to tell your son on that day. The question of Yachol merosh chodesh sounds a little bit of a funny question, but the answer is clearly linking back to that bayom hahu. But that H section can also be seen as the continuation of the C section, the very beginning of the Magid. Avadim hayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim, vayotzienu Hashem Elokeinu misham biyad chazaka v'zuran tuyah. And if Hashem wouldn't have taken us out of Mitzrayim, we'd still be slaves there. Va'afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevonim, kulanu zikenim, kulanu yodim et haTorah. Even if we knew everything, mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yitziat Mitzrayim. V'chol hamarber l'saper b'yitziat Mitzrayim harei ze meshubach. Anybody who, the more you say, the better off you are. I might think that you should, if the more you say, the better off you are, I might think to start already from Rosh Chodesh. Yachol merosh chodesh. The H section is a direct continuation of the C section. It's put at the end because it ties back into that v'yigadet lavinecha bayom hahu, because the drasha is going to be on that bayom hahu. But that's how it becomes really clear that this entire section from C, D, E, F, G, and H, this is all one unit of Magid. I believe this is Rav. This is Rav's version of Magid, but don't quote me on that one. My memory sometimes slips. But this is one of the versions that's mentioned in the Gemara of what the Magid is. Now, within this section of the Magid, we looked at the opening piece, right? The Avadim Hayinu. I just want to take a look at one more piece in here, or maybe two other pieces in here, just so we get a sense that this version of Magid is very, very clearly a post-Churban version of Magid. Why? Let's take a look at the D section. Maaseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, Shayu Mesubin b'Bnei Brak. Vayu Misaprim b'Yitziat Mitzrayim kol oto halayla. So we understand why this is definitely connected to the more the merrier. The more you say, the better the mitzvah. And yet, what was going on? So if we know a little bit about the history, these were the people who were around during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim and how we're going to go from Galut. We're going to go from slavery. We're going to go from Gnai into Shevach. Rabbi Akiva was the one who led the charge in backing Bar Kochba. Some of the others there weren't so sure, and some of the others debated against him. And many historians are convinced that this Maaseh, with these 5 Chachamim who are sitting there, but they're debating all night long. Is it time for us to go to the next version of redemption? Yetziat Mitzrayim was the first version of redemption. Returning to Eretz Yisrael after Galut Bavel, after Babylonian exile, is the second version of redemption. Are we ready for the third version of redemption? This is a post-Chorban peace, as well as the peace with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who couldn't understand how can we recite Yetziat Mitzrayim when we live in dark ages, when we live in dark times. I never understood, he says, how we live in dark times. How can you celebrate Yetziat Mitzrayim when we live in such dark times? So this is a Magid section that, yes, it's the version of Magid that's Avadim Hayinu, but it has been reshaped. It's been reshaped by Galut. It's been reshaped by Chorban, right, to reflect the realities that people were living in. We get to the final Magid section, right? The part that's highlighted here in green. And here we start with what actually sounds a little bit like Birchat HaTorah. Baruch Shomer Avtachato Yisrael Baruch Hu Shakadosh Baruch Hu. Sorry. Birchat HaTorah is elsewhere. So we have this piece that starts with Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah, and then we get to the J section, and the J section features, right? At least in this part, the J section is right. Meaning this version of the Haggadah continues for a long time, but this features Vhee Sheamda lavotenu v'lanu shelo achad bilvad amad aleinu lechalotenu ela shebechol dor v'dor amdim aleinu lechalotenu. This is what, for many people, this is a very powerful moment of the Seder. It captures a lot of what Jewish experience has been for the last 2,000 years, sometimes better and, unfortunately, oftentimes worse. But there's something really unusual about this. Vhee Sheamda. What is the Vhee? What is it that has stood by us for all these generations? So go back to the beginning of J. Baruch Shomer Avtachato Yisrael. Blessed be the one who keeps his promise to Bnei Yisrael. Shakadosh Baruch Hu Chishavat Hakes La'asot Kemo Shamar Li Avraham Avinu B'Vrit Ben Habatarim. He worked the whole thing out to fulfill the Brit Ben Habatarim. And it's that Brit Ben Habatarim which has stood us for all ages. Here's something really unusual. I'm going now to the third and final page of the source sheets. The first passage over here is a Brit Ben Habatarim. Let's just read it. Vayomer Elav. This is, there's context here that's missing a little bit. Vayomer Elav, Ani Hashem Asher Oseticha Me'ur Kastim. Sounds a little bit like this beginning of Aseret Adibrot. Lateit Lecha Et Haaretz Hazot Rishta. Hashem tells Avram he's going to get the land. Vayomar Hashem Elokim B'ma'ida Ki Yirashena. How do I know? Vayomer Elav Kechali Agla Meshuleshet Ve'iz Meshuleshet Va'il Meshulash. Take for me a triple calf. We don't know what that means. What's a triple calf? Is it a 3-year-old calf? Is it? We don't know. Does Mishulesha? We don't know exactly what it means. And a triple aiz, a triple goat, and a triple ram, and a turtle dove, and a young bird. By pasuk yud, vayikachlo et kol eila. So Avram does exactly as Hashem told him. Vayivatero tam batavech, gets split. Hashem splits them. Vayitenish bitro lekrat re'ehu, right? And Avram sets, or Hashem sets up the halves split facing each other. Let's just go a little bit further. Let's jump down to Pasuk Yud Gimel. Vayomer le'Avram, right? So after this whole scene, Hashem tells Avram, you asked B'ma'ida, Yado ateda. Here's how you're going to know. Ki ger yezaracha be'eretz lo lahem va'avadum v'inu otam arba me'ot shana. Your children are going to go into slavery, and they're going to be oppressed for 400 years. Don't worry, I'll take care of their oppressors. They'll come out rich. You're going to be buried comfortably. The fourth generation. Don't ask me how fourth generation works out with 400 years. The fourth generation returns here. Brit B'Tarim opens with Hashem telling Abraham, I'm giving your children this land. Or I'm giving you this land. Abraham says, how do I know? Hashem says, okay, let's do a ceremony over here. And now you're not going to get the land, but your children are going to get the land. In 400 years, your children are coming back here. Once they come back there, the land is theirs. What that means is that the lifespan of Brit Bin Habatarim, in terms of, right, is 400 years. And the focus of Brit Bin Habatarim is whether Bnei Yisrael have Eretz Yisrael. That's it. Where do we get this notion that Brit Ben Habatarim means that in every generation, no matter what happens to us, Hashem is going to save us? The Psukim and the Chumash say nothing about that. Brit Ben Habatarim expires when Bnei Yisrael cross over the Jordan River and conquer the Canaanite and settle into the land. At that point, Hashem has fulfilled Brit Ben Habatarim. It's over. And yet, look at what happens in the Haggadah. Now, it didn't happen all of a sudden. And I'm just going to share with you two other Mikorot over here. The first is from Breshit Rabbah. I think it's the oldest source that we have for this. Breshit Rabbah writes as follows: Kechali agla mishuleshet zo Bavel shema'amedet shlosha Nebuchadnezzar ve'evil merodach uvel shatzar. So Midrash says that the agla mishuleshet represents Bavel. Eiz mishuleshet Zumadai. That's the Persian Media Empire. Shema'amedet shlosha Koresh Daryavesh and Achashverosh. Ayel Mishulash, that refers to Yavan, the Greek Empire. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, Kol HaRuchot. They have a debate as to why the Greek Empire
I'm listening to
is three. V'tor v'gozal zo Edom. So Breshit Rabbah comes along and takes a look at Brit Ben Habatarim and says, I have to rewrite it, or I have to reinterpret it. I'm going to interpret the symbolic elements over here as referring to the four empires that subjected Bnei Yisrael. A few hundred years later, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer does something similar and also looks at all those things as being symbolic. Does something interesting. Talks about each one of them referring to a different empire. Take a look at he includes, so you have the three major empires. Take a look at the second line from the bottom. V'tor, the turtle dove, Elu b'nei Yishmael. So Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer goes beyond the rabbinic notion of the four empires and takes it into into Islamic territory. The Gozal, the bird, Elu Yisrael. So Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer goes and reworks this a little bit and says, no, I'm going to extend it even beyond the Babylonians, the Greeks, and the Romans. I'm going to take it even until the Ishmaelites, right, who the Muslims who oppressed them. But Yisrael remains. The Gozal remains. The Gozal was not split. It's based on this rabbinic tradition, a rabbinic tradition that clearly starts from a position of exile, and an exile that has to end. They take the Brit bin Habatarim, which was limited originally in scope to 400 years or 4 generations, until Bnei Yisrael settled themselves back into the land. And at that point, Hashem has finished. Reshit Rabbah says, wait a minute, I'm going to expand Brit Ben Habatarim. Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer says, I'm going to extend it even further than you did. And comes along the Haggadah. It's a passage that's probably written around the same time as Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, maybe a little bit later. Nobody knows for sure, but the assumption is that the passage was written in the time of the Gaonim. The time of the Gaonim, they made explicit. Brit bin Habatarim is not limited to Hashem bringing Am Yisrael back to Eretz Yisrael. Vhee Sheamda lavotenu belanu. Shelo echad bilvad amad aleinu lechalotenu. Ela shakadosh baruch hu el shebechol dor vador. It's not just those 4 dorot, but in every generation. Bechol dor vador omdim aleinu lechalotenu. V'akadosh baruch hu matzilinu miyadam. What we have then, I'm just going to summarize in 1 minute. What we have then is a process in which the Leil HaSeder started as a festive meal focused on an animal. The animal is sitting whole on the table. You had to carve around the bones. You couldn't break them. It was the centerpiece. It was the focus of all conversation. Came the Churban. Chazal said, we have to redo this entire thing. The first redoing is let's refocus the entire Seder on making sure that the Ani has a good meal. And let's make sure that the Ani gets the same meal that we get. 4 cups of wine, vegetables to dip so they don't get too hungry, because he wasn't allowed to eat before it got dark. So vegetables to dip, the full meal. And they didn't make that up. They looked back to Sefer Devarim as their inspiration. Simcha and Chag must be halach ma'anya kol dechvinye teviecho. We have to invite people in. Within the context of having the Ani there and bringing the Ani into the family circle, within that context, the Magid takes the Jewish experience and says we have to re-update the Jewish experience. The Jewish experience didn't end with our entering into Eretz Yisrael, because by now it doesn't look like things are getting any better soon. So they reimagine the Brit bin Habatarim is happening again and again and again in every generation. And that is Vhee Sheamda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rav Tzvi. Thank you.
Rabbi
Thank you
Tzvi,
very
a
much.
question to you. Is this
Okay,
a
30
tikkun?
seconds.
Yeah, is this a tikkun to the situation at the time of Yirmiyahu and Yeshayahu?
I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, so I really can't.
Because in the time of Yirmiyahu and Yeshayahu, especially Yirmiyahu, he complained about not taking care of the Ger Yatom V'Almana.
Oh, so yes. So it certainly, that was an issue all along. And it's not just, it was Amos and Yeshayahu and continued all the way through.
Thank you.
Okay, thank